So the West has proven that they will, that the treasuries can be weaponized, and that if you're on the wrong side, well, then you'll get it confiscated and maybe even given to the country you're in the midst of a war against in the form of weaponry. That's a line that's very difficult to come back from. So when you add into it weaponization, sanctions, inflation, who the hell wants to hold our treasuries? Why not hold something like gold, which has doubled the performance of the treasury, has no counterparty risk, and if it's in your possession, cannot be confiscated? That's why you're seeing the central banks on one hand buy so much in the way of gold, because it's an asset with no counterparty liability that has outperformed the treasury. And you would think that a country that would really want to continue to be the world reserve currency would cling to the privilege and do all we could to foster confidence in this country. And the things that we've done over the last 4 years are contrary to that. And that's why I say that the current administration, now Trump isn't in yet, he's the president-elect, but the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, in my mind, has done more to destroy this country than any external foe could have ever have done.
On this episode of What the Finance Podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Andy Schectman. So Andy is the founder of Miles Franklin and a really interesting commentator on everything that's happening in the world, and I'm sure we'll get onto a lot of it. So Andy, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Anthony, good to be here, brother. Thanks for having me, man.
No problem. Looking forward to the conversation. And I was saying, it's sort of been probably over a year since we last spoke, and it feels like longer. A lot has happened. I'm sure we'll get onto a lot of it. But I'd be really interested in hearing your just perspective about. I like to start very broad. So, what are you currently seeing in the economy, and in markets and everything globally? And you can take it wherever you want.
Well, there's a lot of reason for optimism here in the United States, with the Trump administration winning the election. We have yet to see if the House will be Republican controlled. It's looking that way, which would eliminate the deadlock, if you will, in terms of his policies. For me, Anthony, what I find optimistic, or for reason for optimism rather, with the Trump win, is less what he will be able to do with the economy and with the markets and with the dollar, and more with what he hopefully can do to start to restore our culture, which in many ways has been whitewashed over the last several years, starting with things like censorship and cancel culture, wokeness, where you're defined or admitted into a good school or admitted into a good job, not based upon your merit, what you've achieved, how you get along with people, how successful you were along your way in terms of education and in terms of civic doing things outside of volunteering, let's say, all these kind of things that would go into what would make a good candidate for a job. Are you a good person? Do you work hard? Are you on time? Are you punctual? All of those things are sidestepped rather by what's your lifestyle, race, religion, creed, all of these things that have somewhat distorted the American ideals, the electoral system. Maybe we've gained a little bit of credibility back into it. The judicial system, the FBI, the immigration system, all of these things are upside down. And whether or not people watching this agree, many people around the world and in this country do believe those things are upside down. This has created a good deal of divisiveness in this country, where you're defined by who you voted for the last election. These are times that are very foreign to many of us in this country who grew up under a different set of ideals. I think that's what he brings to the table, the ability to start to go back to what it has always meant to be proud to be an American, why people have always wanted to come here and take part in the United States for, freedom of expression, for a justice department or justice system rather that looks at everyone the same way. You're always innocent until proven guilty. There is no two-tiered status or standard for justice, for the things that made this country special. And in many cases, people look around and say, what the hell's happened to this country? Those are the things, whether or not I'm able to completely articulate it the way I'd like to, I could just simply say to you that things are very different in this country now. And I'd like to get back to the way at least they used to be from a cultural standpoint, from a standpoint of, being proud to be an American. And I think there are a lot of patriots here. And I say that I'm one of them. Look, I'm the least likely person to have ever achieved the level of success that I have. I thank God every day for being born in this country. And I outworked people, where you can achieve whatever you want through hard work and effort and doing things the right way. That's the American dream. And I'm emblematic of it. I come from nothing. And somehow over 35 years, we've crossed 10 billion in sales. And I did it with, I guess you would say, the only thing I had going for me were these ideals, were the opportunities that this country provided me. And I think that I thank God every day for it. But I think that's been the most disappointing thing to me over the last several years, less the mismanagement of the world reserve currency, less the brain dead monetary policy and the fiscal irresponsibility, and more so all of the things that have kind of gone sideways in this country from the ideals that it was founded upon. So that's what I'm most excited for with the Trump administration. As far as the economics are concerned, we have a long way to go. Inflation is not going anywhere. You have a Fed that is pivoting, lowering rates. Today, they're going to probably lower rates 25 basis points. Here today is the FOMC meeting. They already lowered them 50 basis points. And this is when they were 65% away from their target rate of 2%. If we believe the nonsense that comes out of the BLS, I think you should just take the L out of the BLS and call it the BS. Because, they're telling us inflation's at 3.5%, roughly. John Williams of Shadow Stats, who just measures it the way it used to be before they continually change the metrics that go into the measurement in order to make to create this inflationary or to conform to an inflationary reality. He'll tell you that inflation's 11%. For all those people out there that say, geez, they tell us inflation is only 3%, but it really doesn't seem that. Whether it be inflation or whether it be unemployment, the numbers that come out of the BLS are really not accurate. You look, for example, at the way that things are framed in this country with like unemployment. Last month, they tell us that only 12,000 jobs are created, and there were supposed to be 120,000. It's a horrible labor report. But what they don't tell us is that 28,000 private sector jobs were lost. At the same time, 40,000 government jobs were added. These are jobs that the government can't even afford. They have to borrow money to pay the salaries. And you go back to the last labor report and you see over 700,000 government jobs added to the payroll. This is a non-productive payroll report. This is a non-productive way of hiring people into the government instead of the private sector. The private sector is shedding jobs. The government is adding jobs. The government doesn't contribute to the economy. The government doesn't have profit motive. The government jobs added should not be what we are focusing on when they tell us we have a strong employment number. So there are a lot of things that this administration needs to tackle. But even if Elon Musk were to come in and trim all the fat, and get rid of all of this wasteful spending, the Congressional Budget Office, Anthony, tells us that by 2030, all of the income tax that comes in, 100% of it will be used just to pay the interest on the debt and mandatory entitlement spending. So, how does a country want to remain being the world superpower militarily and economically when 100% of tax revenue goes to pay just the interest on the debt when things like military spending is discretional. All of the discretional spending would have to be borrowed. And so this is a mathematical situation right now. So I guess what I'm really trying to say in a very disjointed, roundabout way is that there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And that optimism centers around coming back and coming full circle and gaining some sanity after 4 years of this crazy wokeness, cancel culture, censorship, all of the things, the questions, as I mentioned, on the judicial system, the electoral system, the lawlessness in the cities, all of these things that need to be fixed. We have to fix this first. Then we can tackle the financial side of things. So yes, there is reasons to be optimistic, but I think we should be very cautiously optimistic because inflation isn't going anywhere. Even if they balance the budget 100% today, who's going to pay for the 99 trillion shortfall in Medicare Part B, 22 trillion Medicare Part D, 77 trillion in Social Security? These numbers are off the charts. And we're making a big assumption that the government can indeed stop their spending. You have to start by reining in spending. And as much as I am thankful that Trump won his last administration, the debt increased tremendously underneath him. So you have to start by stopping spending, trimming the fat, cutting back. And it's very difficult to do that, even if they sweep the House, which hopefully they do, and policies will go through instead of being deadlocked. And it looks like they will. It's very difficult to tell the constituents that, no, we have to cut this, we have to cut that, we have to cut this. Some politician has to do it, but it's not going to be easy. Reason for optimism, yes, but not going to be easy in terms of what the remedy is. So, I think I'd rather focus today on being optimistic, because I've been pessimistic for 4 years, and it gets old always being a pessimist. So I'm very thankful that we have someone, hopefully, that can get America back to what America always was. But there's a long way to go to tackle the damage that has been done by the massive fiscal and monetary irresponsibility. And it's not going to be easy, especially when you have a Fed lowering rates, which is only going to reignite inflation. And, it's here to stay. So I think that's where we start, at least, and get our house in order, and then we can tackle the financial side of things.
Yeah, lots of great points there, and I think it's interesting how the Fed have started to cut interest rates, but bond yields are increasing. So I feel
Well,
like
that's
there's
the
sort
point.
of
That's really what I'm getting at, and that's a good
yeah,
point, Anthony. That's the market saying, no, 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 no. It's not as easy as just cutting rates. You cut rates by 50 basis points 6 weeks ago, and what has happened since? The 10-year Treasury is up 65 basis points. That's the bond market's way of saying, no, that's not how it works. You can't just continue. You can't lower rates, lower taxes, increase inflation, and think everything is going to be okay. It doesn't work that way. In fact, they can try all they want to lower the federal funds rate, but who's going to buy treasuries of any duration? I think they're uninvestable. You have to be out of your mind to only take 4% on a 10-year treasury and think that's okay. I wouldn't be surprised if we see rates on the 10-year treasury as high as 6%, maybe at least 5% by the time he takes office, 6% by the first quarter. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. The reality is that we have so much in the way of debt and debt obligations and irresponsible spending, and they're trying to lower rates. It doesn't work that way because what all of this stimulus will do by lowering rates and by creating tax breaks is to create inflation, and it will accelerate the inflation. And the market knows that. So to take 4.25% on a 10-year bond, I think, is insanity. And that's what the market, I think, is saying. And I think you'll see rates continue to move higher in this environment for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and I think maybe what's helped them recently is that yields did increase. So there was individuals who sort of went into the front of the curve. They were happy to take that 5%, especially when there was uncertainty in what was happening in the world. But as the supply continues to increase, as yields maybe aren't where they need to be, I think that dollars going up as well. I think it's And then also people are wanting higher risk, so they're actually trying to move into these higher risk assets. So the only way I can see all this being absorbed is through financial repression, which is I guess what they're trying to do with forcing banks to hold more bonds and forcing institutions and pension funds and all these other sort of institutions to hold more of these
Well,
government bonds.
or you get into something like yield curve control, where the Fed is the buyer of last resort. They monetize the debt, which leads to hyperinflation, ultimately, which leads to much higher interest rates. And that's the problem. If we weren't the world reserve currency, if we weren't reliant upon so much in the way of foreign investment into our treasury market in order to finance our debt, which is becoming very large. And not only that, when you talk about the need to come up with over 10 trillion in bond sales, every single year for the next several, just to finance the debt that is coming due and the debt that we have outstanding, to keep the lights on, it becomes very concerning. Who's going to buy our bonds? And that's when the weaponization of the bond market and the sanctioning of countries really starts to muddy the waters, because not only are you looking at an asset like the 10-year treasury that has, I would argue, underperformed. I mean, gold has doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury for the last 25 years, if you look at it over that span of time. And it doesn't have the counterparty risk that we've seen with the 10-year treasury, or with the treasury market in general, rather, where the United States, if they feel that we don't align ideologically and we don't like what you've done, we'll take your money, or the European Union for that matter. So the West has proven that they will, that the treasuries can be weaponized, and that if you're on the wrong side, well, then you'll get it confiscated and maybe even given to the country you're in the midst of a war against in the form of weaponry. That's a line that's very difficult to come back from. So when you add into it weaponization, sanctions, inflation, who the hell wants to hold our treasuries? Why not hold something like gold, which has doubled the performance of the treasury, has no counterparty risk, and if it's in your possession, cannot be confiscated? That's why you're seeing the central banks, on one hand, buy so much in the way of gold, because it's an asset with no counterparty liability that has outperformed the treasury. And you would think that a country that would really want to continue to be the world reserve currency would cling to the privilege and do all we could to foster confidence in this country. And the things that we've done over the last 4 years are contrary to that. And that's why I say that the current administration, now Trump isn't in yet, he's the president-elect, but the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, in my mind, has done more to destroy this country than any external foe could have ever have done. And there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done. But, the issue with a lot of this, Anthony, is that for 15, 20 years of suppressed interest rates, when you mess with Mother Nature and you step on interest rates, you create distortions in asset prices. You create misallocations in resources and capital. And you have markets that are at all-time highs in stocks and real estate. And now we're going to lower rates again. This is creating more of the same issue. Trump wants a lower dollar and lower interest rates. Well, that's all great, but that's not what it takes to fix the problem, as far as I'm concerned. So it's the opposite. That's what got us into this problem to begin with. So at some point, you have to address the issues. And when you take out of the equation the foreign investment from the traditional centers of countries that were, buying our treasuries and funding our standard of living, well, then it becomes a much bigger problem. Those countries are China selling treasuries, Japan is selling treasuries. These countries that have been holding our treasuries, Saudi Arabia, they don't want to do that anymore, and I don't blame them. So it becomes a bigger problem. How do you finance the debt problem, especially when you want to lower taxes? Where does the money come from? That's an issue. And so, tariffs, that's something, but tariffs are higher prices are passed on to the consumer. If you create tariffs across the board on all of these countries, they'll just raise their prices. They're not going to eat it. They'll raise their prices, and it comes across to us as higher prices. So there isn't a magic bullet, but the distortions that have been created over the last 20 years have to be dealt with. And if you come in and try and lower rates, that's why the bond market says no. And that's why gold has been going higher and higher and higher, because it sees through all of this. And I don't think that the Trump administration will fix what ails this country financially, but it may get us on the right path, because it's going to take some time and it's going to come with some pain. And until there are politicians who have, I guess you could say, the courage to really do that, to rein in spending, to massively cut spending and get us back on a path of fiscal sanity, you can't increase spending and cut taxes. It doesn't work that way. So I guess we'll see what happens. But for me, Anthony, it's a good start to try and get our house in order, and then from there we can tackle these financial problems. But those financial problems are not going away just with the Trump victory. In fact, his policies will only exacerbate inflation and lower interest rates more, which created these distortions to begin with.
Hey everyone, sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to extend a massive thank you to you for listening and tuning in, and for your support over these 3 years. So we've had, hundreds of guests that we've welcomed on the podcast. We've had millions of views with hundreds of thousands of different people listening in. So I just wanted to thank you. I started this as a student. I'm now currently working, and I've always done this on the side just because I have a passion for it and I've enjoyed it. And probably similar to yourself, you listen to all these, different YouTube channels and podcasts of people listening to different guests. That's how I started, and I just wanted to sort of take the plunge and be able to have the opportunity to speak to these people, and you've made that happen. So thank you very much. Just myself, don't make any money from this, and it's really a passion project. So thanks for supporting that passion of mine. If you wanted to support the channel, all I ask is if you could like, subscribe, or even comment, positive or negative feedback. I'm always willing to take constructive criticism. I'd really appreciate that. But otherwise, thanks so much. If you can believe it, only 14% of our listeners actually subscribe to the podcast. So if you can, great. If not, no problem at all. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to the show. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned a few times sort of the international, I guess, impact that countries not wanting to buy our or the US's debt, Western debt, has because of potential sanctions. So I'd be interested in hear your thoughts on that further. And then I know BRICs is this entity which I guess is sort of started collaborating even more with the sanctions on Russia. I know some historians sort of compare it to the axes of prior parts of history with Russia, China, North Korea, Iran potentially. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that and the impacts that it could potentially have.
Well, you talk about a system based on trust. What happened a week ago or so, 10 days ago, I think is emblematic of the lack of trust of the Western system. Let me see if I can kind of frame this the right way. So I've talked a lot about Project Enbridge and the BRICS preliminarily agreed upon settlement token called the unit. Let me back up and kind of lay the foundation for it. So there was the G7 meeting in Italy not too long ago, maybe a month or two ago, that coincided with the BRICS meeting in Novigrad. And the Saudis were invited to the BRICS meeting, to the G7 meeting in Italy, and they turned it down. They said, no, we can't make it. But they sent their delegates to Novigrad, to the BRICS meeting, where we see Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil. Well, she comes out and she says, we've agreed in principle to a new settlement currency. And it was done on the sidelines at this meeting with Sergei Glaziev and Vladimir Putin. And the reason I've been saying for almost 4 years that there would be a common settlement currency with the BRICS is because Glaziev has told us that for almost 4 years. In dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews. That he was the architect of it, the Eurasian Economic Union financial minister, and the architect of a basket of commodities and a basket of currencies. And this is the way we're going. And it made a lot of sense. And I've talked about it a lot. Well, last year, by the way, when Delma said this, she said, we've agreed to this new settlement token called the unit, which will be 40% gold backed, 60% a basket of BRICs plus currencies. They didn't say a basket of commodities the way that Glaziev had originally said. They said just a basket of gold. Now, gold, by the way, was the only other tier one reserve asset, is reclassified by the Bank of International Settlements in 2019, and the central banks have been buying it at a level the world has never seen. There's been over 40 banks that have repatriated all of their gold from the New York Fed, which gave access for the last, I don't know how many years, 50 years to the COMEX, and the Bank of England, which always gave access to the LBMA, the two primary trading hubs in the world. All of these countries would leave their gold with the safety of the Bank of England and the New York Fed, with the ability to trade on those two platforms whenever they wanted. Over 40 banks have brought their money home from these places, and the easy way to brush it off is to say, well, that's because of weaponization of the Treasury market. People want it in their own possession. Well, that's only part of it. The unit token says that it will be minted within the countries that possess the gold, within the borders of the countries that possess the gold, and have it independently and continuously audited. That's why a lot of these countries have brought their gold back. So this was something that was really accelerating. She said it would be traded over Project Enbridge, which I've talked about for over a year. Project Enbridge is a cross-border payment system that was developed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. And it was also done in coordination with the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub. And I've always thought about that it was kind of strange that the BIS would be involved with the BRICs, as the BIS is largely a Western institution. But my mind always glossed over that. And I would argue that was a mistake of mine. I thought it was interesting, but I'll get to this in a second, kind of frame it the right way. It became even more interesting when Saudi Arabia became the fifth full participant in Enbridge. They had 30 or 40 observational participants, but you had 5 full-time participants, including Saudi Arabia. Now, Enbridge is not compatible with the dollar. And if we are being told from the former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, and she's the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, it's not a small fry. We've agreed in principle to a new settlement token called the unit, 40% gold, 60% BRICS currencies, traded over Enbridge, and the SWIFT system is not compatible. So no SWIFT interference, no US interference. It gives them the ability to trade without having to go through the SWIFT system. Central bank digital currencies, and then a settlement token. So the idea was each country will trade back and forth their local currencies, keeping their own monetary house in order. Rupee for ruble, yuan for real, whatever it may be. And then the ability, if, for example, I have too much rupee, I don't want anymore, or maybe I just want something different for selling you my energy or my commodities, I want the unit token. Great, we've agreed upon it in principle. So this was all really interesting. I did an interview on Kitco with Michelle McCory not too long ago, and she's always challenging me, and she's always very prepared. And she said, Andy, I just have to ask you one question. Isn't the BIS a Western institution? And it, ding, 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 ding in my head. I'm like, yeah, I've always thought that, but I guess I looked past it. That was a mistake. And we're talking back and forth, and you got the Fed who has initiated Project Cedar and Project Agora. These are their CBDC payment systems, cross-border payment systems, similar to Enbridge. And we're talking. I said, it's interesting. I said, the BRICS just had their big meeting, and they were talking a lot about the WHO, the United Nations, the IMF, the BIS. It's as if they want to integrate with the West. And I said to her, maybe it was these big bankers who've controlled the world forever. Maybe it was their realization that Well, they can't have a one world currency like they've always wanted to have, but maybe a one world digital platform that they can control. So they help develop Enbridge, and they're also, of course, with Project Cedar and Agora. So they'll pull the strings from above, and maybe there's a couple of currencies, settlement currencies, or central bank digital currencies of other nations, but we can control the pathways. And then we went with that for that. Yeah, that makes sense, but I don't know. Well, let me get to the point what I'm getting at here. I know I'm kind of going around and around, but what just happened by the BIS, I find to be an indictment of the West. It's right out of a James Bond movie. It's espionage, as far as I'm concerned. And it's only going to crystallize the resolve of the BRICs, and it really pissed them off. So let me explain what happened. I got to put my glasses on so I can read something here to you. All right. So let's go back. Enbridge, which would trade the new settlement token, was developed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, and Saudi Arabia just became the 5th full-time member. Backed by the BIS Innovation Hub, right? So this has been going on for 4 years, the development of this program, and the technology primarily comes from China. So you have a State Department official who comes out in conjunction with the BRICS meeting, and he says, alternatives to the SWIFT system and the undermining of the dollar's role threaten global democracy. What? Like, if that's not a quite a statement, to say that it undermine any alternative to the SWIFT system and the dollar's global role threaten global democracy. Paul Krugman, the talking head economist, he says de-dollarization is in fact impossible because there just aren't any good alternatives. So you got Paul Krugman, this knucklehead, saying there aren't any good alternatives, and the State Department comes out and says alternatives to the SWIFT system and undermining the dollar's role threaten global democracy. Well, that goes back and forth, kind of contradicts one another. There are no good alternatives, but if any alternatives threaten global democracy, we have a problem with that. So let's get back to the story. So you have this guy named Augustus Carstens. He reminds me of Augustus from Willy Wonka, only grown up. Looks just like him. And he says, we cannot directly support, he's the head of the general manager of the BIS. We can not directly support any project for the BRICS because we cannot operate with countries that are subject to sanctions. I want to be very clear about that. And then you get Agatha Demarius, a senior policy fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations. In the long run, there is no doubt that mechanisms like BRICS Bridge could be useful for China, Russia, or others to hide sensitive transactions from Western authorities. The underlying technology is, in fact, a tool to circumvent sanctions and potentially undermine the dollar's dominance in the global financial system. I mean, you want to talk about gross. The BIS wants to pull the plug on Enbridge after 4 years of development, knowing it was for the BRICS to trade outside the SWIFT system. And at the 12th hour, after they've announced it, launched it, and it's operational, they say, no, we can't do this because Russia's being sanctioned, Iran is being sanctioned. We can't be part of this. Where the hell have they been for the last 4 years? Why was this not brought up before the big BRICS meeting, before it was launched, before they tell the world we have a settlement currency? It's right out of a James Bond movie. It is flat out espionage as far as I'm concerned. And they just figured this out, I guess is what I'm trying to say, Anthony. So what this is going to do is crystallize the resolve of these countries. Why would they ever want to hold our treasuries when we can do this last minute, underhanded, dirty thing saying, well, the BIS can't stand behind the BRICS doing this and their ability to trade free from SWIFT because it undermines, because they're being sanctioned by the West. But the sanctions on the West, by the West, are what is the rallying cry for the rest of the world. Look, it's okay for us to give $200 billion to the Ukraine and without congressional oversight, Stinger missiles and F-16 jets, but it's not okay for China to give any help to Russia, where Janet Yellen says to CNN, we're okay with Xi Jinping and Putin being buddies, but if she gives one penny to Russia, and the Russian war machine will sanction their banks, their companies in Beijing itself. It's the hypocrisy that these countries say this is ridiculous, that they feel that it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter that we invaded Iraq 20 years ago under false pretenses, never found weapons, destroyed their country, toppled their regime. We're still occupying their country today after 20 years and sanctioning 14 of their banks for having the audacity to try to buy liquid natural gas from through Iranian banks, which are sanctioned. So we sanctioned those. We're holding their oil revenue. They made $90 billion in 23. We're holding it at the New York Fed. They can't even control it. And at the end of last year, they asked us for $1 billion. And we said, yeah, it's yours, but it's not a good time. Come back next year. So they've officially applied to BRICs. They're kicking Western coalition forces out of the country. They've made trading in dollars illegal. And there are no banks left in Iraq that hold any green dollar bills. As of January of last year, they're gone because of this. So what I'm getting at is that what the BIS just did, which is a Western institution, is exactly why these countries are aligning. Yes, it will certainly set them back a bit, but I do believe that it will only reinforce the reasons why they are banding together. So it's not the end of the BRICS by a long shot, but what it is more of an example of the West having a holier than thou approach to all of this, which I think is wrong in a world that is globalized. If it were just we take care of our country, close our borders, bring back all the military bases and just focus on the United States, fine. You can have, you can, it doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks about you. But when you want to pretend to be the world reserve currency, a country that is dependent upon foreign investment of our treasuries, this is going full circle to the beginning. Who wants to hold our treasuries that can be weaponized, sanctioned, stolen, or inflated away? You have inflation risk, default risk, you have sanction risk, you have confiscation risk. All of these things are the reasons why you see the formation of the BRICS and why you have a much lesser appetite for U.S. Treasury debt, which in the long run leads to higher interest rates or monetization of the debt by the Fed, which leads to hyperinflation and higher interest rates. It's not what happens moment by moment by moment that matters. Look at the big picture. And the big picture is that instead of clinging to the privilege of being the world reserve currency, we're doing everything we can to destroy that. And I think that will have negative effects in the debt market, with credit, and with the way that we are viewed across the globe, and also incentivizing these countries to find strength in numbers and to do things that will be outside of the Western purview, trading in local currencies, trading with one another outside the dollar, and looking to things like gold and other commodities as a replacement for the Treasury. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but these are very complex times, Anthony, and I think you have to take a step back and look at the big picture.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for laying that all out. I think it's important, as you said, to provide the context and then the impact it will have on, so the reserve currency as well as countries globally. But if we look at, you mentioned this asset, this transaction mechanism, there's sort of going to be a backing of commodities. So what impact do you think that will have, I guess, on the value of commodities? Is this going to be specific gold? Is it going to be other sort of a joint basket? And what does this look like?
For the BRICS currency?
Yeah.
The BRICS currency says just gold. It doesn't, originally it was a basket of commodities, but they say the unit token, the white paper, says a basket of 40% gold in kilobar form that is deliverable upon request. In a basket, 60% of BRICS plus currencies with not any more than 30% of any one currency being in that basket. So it's just gold, and that makes sense. I mean, gold was reclassified by the Bank of International Settlements in 2019. There's the BIS again, as the world's only other tier one reserve asset. And if you look, and that's next to US dollars and treasuries, but if you look at all of the gold accumulation and repatriation by the central banks of the world, it makes good sense. And that's why a lot of people believe gold will be revalued at a much higher level. That's not pie in the sky. It's held in foreign central bank balance sheets in an account, can't make it up, called the gold revaluation account. The head of the Dutch National Bank keeps saying we should revalue our gold. It's still valued at $35 an ounce, the old Bretton Woods price. And it can't offset liabilities. They want to change the rules. They want to jack gold way up and offset the liabilities on their balance sheet with the price of gold and peg it to a new system. As crazy as that sounds, Cynthia Loomis, the senator from Wyoming, said the same thing in at the Bitcoin meeting in Tennessee not too long ago, right after Trump spoke, saying, "Yeah, I would consider building a strategic Bitcoin account for the United States." She gets up on stage and says, "I'm creating a bill to float to Congress that will revalue the gold held by the Federal Reserve on behalf of the U.S. Treasury to a level high enough to where we can take a portion of those funds and buy the Bitcoin for the strategic account." It wouldn't surprise me if they revalue gold, and it wouldn't even require congressional approval. Janet Yellen could just tell Jerome Powell, "Here's what the price of gold is, and anyone that wants to sell it to us, to the U.S. Treasury, other nations, will pay them X for it." Every $4,000 increase in the price of gold equates to $1 trillion free and clear to the U.S. Treasury general account. As crazy as this sounds, why not put gold at 130,000 an ounce? A Bitcoin can go there. People don't think twice about that. What do all the central banks own? Gold. What have they all been buying? Gold. What have they all been bringing home? Gold. Would it behoove them all to have gold much higher, that they could offset their liabilities? Sure, it would. It's almost a form of a reset now. It would create a lot of inflation and would have consequences to it. But if we put it at 130,000, it just like that would offset our 36 trillion in liabilities. As crazy as that sounds, over my shoulder is President Roosevelt. He did something similar. Gold was money back then in 1933. Everyone owned it, but he confiscated it and then devalued the dollar by 40% immediately, and gold went from 20 to 35, just like that. And that reliquefied the entire treasury. The same thing could happen here. And in a world where all of these countries have been buying gold, look, if you talk about a system, so you already have the former president of Brazil and the head of the new development bank saying, "Yeah, we're going to peg it to gold." Look at the IMF. They came out with a report last year saying gold as a international reserve currency, a barbarous relic no more, ? And then you have Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, saying a CBDC not pegged to something is fiat. Well, what would you peg it to? Gold. They're using a 40% pegging. That's what the Swiss used, before they delinked it from their constitution. That gives you 60% monetary maneuverability, but you have to peg gold at a much, much, much higher price. So, yeah, could they do it? Could they revalue gold? Sure, they could. And that is what the price is. I mean, in China, the price of silver has been $4 higher than in the West. Is that what the price is? Sure, if you can deliver it there. But if globally gold is then set at a much higher price, it offsets the liabilities on the balance sheets that is then used to peg to a new system with a marriage between blockchain technology and the price of gold, so that you're showing immutability and veracity for the whole world to see, have it independently audited. Sure, it makes sense. I have no proof that this will happen, but when you hear the head of the Dutch National Bank continually say it, when you hear Cynthia Loomis say it, it's something that they notice. Look, Jim Rickards says it all the time. He says gold's going to 27,000 an ounce based upon pegging it to the M1 money supply. There are a lot of people who will take other numbers, take the M2 and it goes higher, take our debt and divide it into the gold held at Fort Knox, supposedly the 8,300 metric tons, and you come up with much, much, much higher numbers. And that's how you offset your liabilities. You revalue, and when you realize that gold's held on every central bank balance sheet in an account called the gold revaluation account, you start to wonder, could this actually happen? So, not saying it will, but it is an option. It's much easier than default to just simply say, we'll can print the money to pay everyone that they want to sell you their gold, but this is what we're willing to pay for it. This is the official price. That is the official price, and it is that easy. Doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of consequences, but it's something that the politicians certainly notice.
Yeah, it just sounds like too many coincidences to not be, going in that direction. But yep, Andy, thanks so much for your time today. We sort of touched on
It's
so
always
much.
good to see you, Anthony, and I appreciate it. I hope you're doing well, and look forward to coming back on anytime you'll have me.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to do it again in the future. sort of my last question is, what is one message you want people to take away from our conversation?
I think it's time to be optimistic. I've spent too long being pessimistic about what's going on in this country, and today is a time for optimism and hope. Doesn't mean that our financial problems are behind us. In fact, I would argue they're not. But at least we can focus on getting unified again, on bringing back the culture to this country that over the last several years has been kind of whitewashed, where you can have a man who transitions to a woman who changes in the same locker room as the rest of the women swimmers in college and be the fastest swimmer in all of college swimming and destroy every woman swimmer. How does that make a parent feel who spent, you know, hours and days and weeks and months and years getting up early, bringing their daughter to swimming lessons and to swimming meets and doing everything it takes to become a collegiate athlete, only to be destroyed by a man? Now, I'm all for. My parents were hippies. I am all for freedom of expression. I am all for really. I'm very socially liberal, but there's a line that we crossed. There's a line that just isn't right, and the wokeness and the lack of merit replaced by lifestyle and the lawlessness, the craziness, all of this stuff has to end. That's more important. Regaining a sense of unity, that's more important, and that's what I look forward to in this new administration. It won't be easy, but it's something to be optimistic upon. But I'll tell you this: if we had 4 more years of this crazy wokeness, I don't know what this country would look like afterwards. And this comes from someone who grew up with parents that were hippies, and sex, drugs, rock and roll. That was the way it was when I grew up. I was okay with whatever you did, whoever you are, but let's just still remember how we got here. And I think we've kind of lost our way. So hopefully we get back in line with with what's important, and a merit-based society, equal opportunity rather than equality for all. No, it's equal opportunity for all. And if you work hard and you do the right things, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what race you are, what sex you are, you can achieve the American dream. I'm proof positive of that. I come from nothing. And to over 35 years, eclipsed 10 billion in sales because of the ideals that made this country strong. That's what we should focus on right now. Let's do one thing at a time. Let's get our house in order, and then we can tackle the financial problems. But don't lose sight of that. The financial problems are not resolved just with the Trump election. We have a lot of things we need to tackle, but I like the idea of starting with cleaning our own house and getting it in order, and go from there. So let's just say take away a sense of optimism, and we're moving in the right direction.
Yep, great message to take away. But thanks again. If anyone wanted to find out more about your work and what you do, where would the best places for that
Well,
be?
they can send us an email at info@milesfranklin if they'd like to get pricing on our metals that we kind of don't publish. We keep close to the vest. We do have our own YouTube channel that we just started. We're already up to 29,000 subscribers since June. I've always gone on other people's shows like yours, which I like to do. I'm also doing my own now, and just started, and that's Miles Franklin on YouTube, milesfranklin.com. And yeah, we'd appreciate that very much. Anthony and I appreciate you having me on today.
No problem at all. I'll pull that in the description below. But yep, thanks again.
Yeah, you bet. You take care.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening. I really appreciate the support. If you've got value out of this, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or comment, good or bad feedback. I'm always open to that, but it really helps with the channel. As I said before, only about 14% of people actually subscribe to this channel. So if you were to that, it would really help. It could mean we could continue to grow. If not, thanks for watching, and see you on the next show. And you also might like this video right here. All right, thanks again.